We're back. Kevin's Corner on Monday, October 24th. The Colts lose 19-10 to, I don't know, their older brother, their dad, whoever you want to call it. But right now, that's who the Tennessee Titans are. 5 straight over the Colts. Really hard to lose a game in the NFL by more than one score when the other team doesn't score an offensive touchdown. But yet, some way, somehow, the Colts accomplished that on Sunday. Kevin Bowen, Eddie Garrison back from the state of Florida. Pronunciation struggling on this Monday morning. Eddie, good to see you, man.
Nice to you. Nice to see you as well. Nice to be back, but it was also nice to get away there for a week.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some people that will say you got away and the Colts played well.
It's funny. I was texting Casey Valier with the Colts on Sunday. I was like, you realize if the Colts lose, I don't think I should be welcome back because I've missed 2 games and they won 2 games and now they are 1-3-1 in games in which I do the pregame, I cut the highlights, and I produce postgame.
You know what? Matt Hawk might be losing his job here in 24 hours, and some Colts fans might want Eddie Garrison next on that list. So they know where they can find you. Glad you're back, and thank you again to Brendan King for filling in last week. Obviously, a ton to get to today on the podcast. Looking ahead to Wednesday, we'll focus a little bit on the trade deadline coming up Wednesday for our second pod of the week. I think it's relevant. A week from Tuesday is the trade deadline. I think it's also relevant when you can kind of look at a little bit of where things are. Carson Wentz, Commanders related, now that he's on injured reserve. That obviously impacts your draft picks for next season. All that stuff. Today, of course, we'll focus on the Colts and the Titans from yesterday, what I didn't like, what I liked. I want to start here before we get into the nitty-gritty, Eddie, of just probably my biggest takeaway from yesterday, big picture related, is just where the Colts stand within this division. You know, the AFC South was created in 2002. Colts dominated it for the first decade plus. Chuck Pagano and Ryan Grigson won 16 straight games in this division, which is just an astonishing number. And now here you are. You've won 1 of your last 6. You've been down double digits in, or I should say 2 scores, in every single one of those 6 games. You're now going 9 straight without a halftime lead. I know that includes some games that aren't within the division. And if you look at it, you know, in a way, you can see some signs of the other 3 teams in the division either thinking they have the answer at quarterback long term, or Houston in a position next year to certainly address it with an early pick. And the Colts just aren't there. And again, by no means am I saying Malik Willis, Trevor Lawrence, and the 2023 Texans quarterback is going to be the answers to those franchises. But the Colts just don't have even that hope. It's just a really dire time for the Colts in the AFC South. And I don't think it's a good division. I don't think the Titans are frankly that good, to be honest with you. I don't, which I think makes matters worse. I think personnel-wise, outside of Jeffrey Simmons and Derrick Henry and I guess Danico Autry when he plays the Colts, I don't think anyone really scares you about that. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now overall, Eddie, of just Halloween comes on the calendar, and I find myself having this annual tradition now of, all right, let's look up the Titans schedule and see which games the Colts can have go their way because they need gobs and gobs of help. And I did that yesterday. And I did it with the Texans in 2019 or 2020. And I had to do it with the Titans again last year. Like, you just never play from ahead in this division. You never play from ahead in games. And right now, the urgency within this division is just lacking. You continue to get behind by multiple scores to these bad football teams. And it is an ugly, ugly sign. And if I were Jim Irsay, it would have all of my attention.
Yeah, to go to your point there, the Titans' schedule gets significantly harder after Week 8. They travel to Houston for Week 8, Week 9, Kansas City, Week 10, Denver. And then they go to Green Bay. Then they also have Cincinnati and Philadelphia. And then, of course, they have a nice little 3-game stretch with the injury status of the Los Angeles Chargers. They have the Jags, they have the Chargers, and the Texans before they close the season out with Dallas and Jacksonville. So that's a very...
They got some brutal road games left.
Yeah, they do. They have some brutal road games, but they also have some favorable home games as well. And then you look at the upcoming 5-game stretch for the Colts, you could say this is the most important stretch of the season for the fate of Frank Reich as his status as the head coach of the Indianapolis Colts. You have Washington at home. You have to go to New England. You have to go to Vegas. Then you have Nick Sirianni and the Philadelphia Eagles coming to Lucas Oil Stadium.
Could be undefeated.
Correct. Followed by a Monday Night Football game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. 4 of those teams have a losing record. So it's a very important stretch for the Colts.
It's just the fact that you just had to rattle that off, Eddie, just again sums up everything right now.
Right.
Like October 24th, and here you are for the umpteenth season in a row needing to read off schedules of your division foe because you've been swept by them for a second straight season, and you need help. And when you rattle off that schedule, I think to myself, there's no way Tennessee wins 9 games. And who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong, but you just watch them, and without Harold Landry, without Taylor Lewan, trading away A.J. Brown, the dude who had the pick 6 yesterday was claimed off the Pittsburgh practice squad a month ago. Last year, they played the most guys in NFL history. That means you have tons of injuries in a season, and they're the number 1 seed. They find ways. They are the tougher, better coached, cleaner football team right now, and 5 straight is alarming. And I asked Frank Reich on Friday, doesn't this one mean a little bit more to you? I mean, he's a human being, and Frank admitted that. Yeah, it does. It means more, and that's the effort that your football team gives you in such a critical game. That game should mean more to the Colts than it means to the Titans. I thought there was a moment after halftime, which I think sums up everything for the Colts and the Titans, Mike Vrabel and Frank Reich right now. We're going to play that clip a little bit later. I'll hit on that a little bit later. Eddie, as you know, I like to kind of do the under-the-radar play of the game. I felt like as much attention went to the Austin Hooper 3rd and 6 to kind of ice it. I'll go back to the Austin Hooper 3rd and 10, third quarter, where Zaire Franklin, who, by all means has probably overachieved this season what the expectations were coming into the year as a full-time starter, he misses a tackle there just short of the sticks. And that's one of those plays, if you're able to get Hooper on the ground, even if it's a 4th and 2, Tennessee's punting the ball away at that point. You had just scored. You had gotten Hines involved on the previous drive. Beautiful job by Matt Ryan at the line of scrimmage and the no huddle to find Paris Campbell for the touchdown. It was 13-7. I felt like that was the opportunity. If you get a stop there and you get a drive down 1 score, who knows what can happen. 3rd and 10 again to Hooper. He makes Franklin miss on just kind of a little pass to the flat. That's a first down. Robert Woods converts a 3rd and 4 later in the drive, and old Randy knocks one in from 38, pushes the lead back to 2 scores. When it was always 2 scores, you felt like it was insurmountable, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's the play I'm going to circle. The 3rd and 10, 3:27 to go, third quarter, as just a play that your defense was hanging in there. And I hate to fault the defense, and I don't want this to sound like I am. That's the play where I'm just like, if Franklin makes that tackle, I don't know.
I'm going to go a little bit earlier in the game. I'm going to go to the second quarter, 10-18 mark, and I think you can kind of guess where I'm heading with this. Nyheim Hines has a carry that goes for a 2-yard loss. Jeffrey Simmons makes the tackle, but the officials completely miss on the face mask penalty.
Yep.
That put the Colts 2nd and 12, and then if that penalty is called, in my opinion, you don't know if Matt Ryan's calling a different play or Frank Reich, then it's an interception. And I think even Rick Venturi pointed this out, I think, on the radio broadcast. I don't have video footage, so I can't really see much of the game sometimes. He said that, I don't know who it was, somebody lined up over the line of scrimmage and they were offside on the interception. So
really,
yeah, he said it was either on the interception or it was on the Jeffrey Simmons tackle in the backfield. He felt like on one of those two plays, I can't remember which, that the defensive lineman lined up offside, and it really allowed to either it was Matt Ryan being disrupted on the pass that he intended for Paris Campbell or for Nyheim Hines to get tackled in the backfield in the way he did. But I think that missed face mask penalty in the second quarter because the Colts have the ball on the Tennessee 26. I mean, they are driving, and that was the
should get at least 3 points.
Yeah, and it would have been a tie game. Instead, it turns around, and then Tennessee is able to take the ball back, and they're already up 10-0.
Yeah, awful call. We'll obviously get into that sequence right there. I know Jeffrey Simmons is a damn good football player, damn good, but I would like to see Quentin Nelson on that play not allow Jeffrey Simmons to absolutely take Quentin Nelson and push him 3 yards into the backfield to where he has a chance to tackle Hines.
Yeah.
Back there as well. All right, Eddie, let's get into what I didn't like after that loss.
I'm going to say there's a lot of it that you obviously don't like. So where do you want to start? You want to start with Ryan's turnovers?
Yeah.
Or do you want to start with the slow start?
Let's go with Ryan's turnovers. Eddie, simply, you have a turnover machine at quarterback.
Yep.
And that is so alarming to say when you have a 15-year vet who started over 200 games, who has a resume that will be debated for Canton one day, and yet you lead the NFL in fumbles, you lead the NFL in interceptions. And to me, when I see the interceptions, it's not like this is a noodle arm trying to fit an 18-yard out pattern into some tight window, or he's trying to, he knows that safety's cheating over from one seam or from one hash mark, and he's trying to fit it down the seam, and the velocity is now 88 miles per hour, not 92. These are just bad mistakes. Rookie mistakes that I thought if Malik Willis would have played to end that game, you could maybe bait him into making some of those mistakes when Tannehill got hurt. That is what is truly alarming. Yesterday, you dropped back, 44 pass attempts?
Yeah.
5.5 yards per pass attempt. That is horrific. It is especially horrific when you're playing the worst passing defense in the NFL. The Tennessee Titans entered Sunday with the worst passing defense in the NFL, 32nd, I think nearly 8 yards per play. You had 5.5 per attempt. One completion over 14 yards. It's just nothing vertical, man. Like, it's just, unless it's the Alec Pierce outside the number ball, which I don't even think they attempted any of those yesterday, you have absolutely nothing. And with Ryan, dink and dunk central, I think it creates a ton of limitations. Like, I think you got to force the ball down the field. Even if, the percentages are small, I think you've got to send a message to a defense throughout a game of your safeties cannot cheat this far up. Because we're going to attempt it. Again, Pierce, he's got to get a couple of those a game. I like to see Pittman attempt a little bit more vertical. Paris Campbell taking some strides forward, certainly. But again, even him, can you tap into that speed at the second or third level
right
of a defense? When you go dink and dunk, if you do it, again, it puts a lot of pressure on you to sustain drives. I thought CBS made a good point yesterday of the Colts rank, second in the NFL in 10-play drives this season. Okay, I guess they possess the ball well, but they also pointed out they've only scored touchdowns on 2 or 3 of those drives because it's so hard to sustain a 12-play drive in the NFL. I mean, you saw the Titans yesterday. Colts defense outstanding in the red zone there. It's just hard to do. And basically what you're seeing at the dink and dunk and the checkdowns, it's one thing to do that. And Phillip Rivers did a lot of that in 2020. But what Rivers did was he didn't put you in the catastrophic mistakes of the turnovers. You look at his turnover numbers from that year. I mean, I know he had a bad game against Cleveland, and you can insert another bad game here. But for the most part, he turned the ball over. I want to say it was combined 13. I think he had 11 picks and 2 fumbles. 13 turnovers for the year. Right now, Matt Ryan's got, is it 9 fumbles and 11 picks? Or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe it's 9 picks and 11 fumbles.
Mm-hmm. I think it's 11 fumbles and 9 picks.
I mean, what the hell? And it's just, that is what is crippling. Let's go over the 2 interceptions. The first interception, and I guess this is going to fall a little bit on Reich. And I've got a little bit more Reich stuff I want to get into here in a few minutes, but let's focus on the first INT. Frank Reich took blame for that after the game. He basically said that he was complaining about the Hines face mask that you brought up earlier, Eddie,
and he got the call in too late to Matt Ryan, and they shouldn't have called that play or should have checked out of that play. So one, Frank Reich, a non-emotional head coach, gets too emotional in that moment. Therefore, he's putting his offense in a bad situation. That's malpractice as a head coach. It's malpractice as a play caller. It gets back to the root question I've had with Reich over the years as the CEO.
Yep.
And both calls probably went the way they should have, but look at the two challenges yesterday. Colts lose it, Titans win it. Those are the thing. Vrabel, he was taunting throwing that red flag on the field, knowing full well of he is so locked in and ingrained to what's going on that individual play. He's got his guy up in the booth. Boom, boom, easy, easy. Whereas Reich, naturally, when you're the play caller and the defense is out on the field, you're thinking about the next drive.
Yeah.
From a play calling standpoint,
Yeah.
you can't be fully into it. I think that's such a disadvantage that the Colts have. And it was a rare Reich moment complaining to that level, but it cost the Colts. You can't yell at the refs and be the play caller. You just can't do that. There's not enough time in between plays. So that's one issue of the interception I have. The second issue still falls on Ryan. It's a 2nd and 13, Eddie. The Colts have been checked down central all game long to that point. Tennessee, watch the play. Everybody go back and watch that play. Not only does Andrew Adams pick that ball off and take it back, if he doesn't pick it off, that corner picks the ball off. You can see the corner. He's running to where the ball's going to be, and Adams just kind of steps in front of him and makes the play. Even if Campbell stops and settles down there, that ball still gets picked, in my opinion. And that is where, again, 15-year vet, 37-year-old quarterback, aren't you thinking there, hey, 2nd and 13, yeah, I want to get 5 or 6 here to put us in third and manageable, but the defense knows that. So maybe I need a pump fake. Maybe I need to, do you recognize where the free rusher's coming from? Do you dirt it? Do you take a sack? Even a sack there, you're still in field goal range. Obviously, It would be 3rd and long, but you're still in field goal range. So that's where I just have issues. Yes, Reich, but also with Ryan. The second pick with Ryan was reminiscent of Denver, just absolutely horrific. He had Allie Cox a little bit on that mesh concept if he wanted to hit him. Clearly he's locked in on Pittman and threw it right to, I think it was David Long, who's a good football player. By the way.
Yeah, on that first one to Campbell, I want to point out a couple of things. I want to see if I can make a connection here. The first of which, Rick Venturi on the radio broadcast said, Ryan, it was the right play. Ryan had the wrong read. He said he should have. I don't know who was going down the sideline, but he said
looked like it was Pierce. I thought.
I think it was Pierce. It may have been Pittman. I can't fully remember, but whoever the receiver going down the sideline was like completely wide open. Because the corner dropped down to cover the check down, because that's pretty much what the Colts were essentially doing the entire time, and Ryan wasn't looking to throw it down the field and push the ball down the field. So this gets me to the Michael Pittman Jr. quote from after the game. When asked about what can you guys do to generate some of those down the field plays, he said, they've just got to trust it. They've got to trust us even though they're playing zone. We'll go out there and make those big boy catches. Alec has done it. Paris has done it. I've done it. Big Mike has done it. Like, everyone's done it. We can actually do it. So is this kind of a subtle shot maybe at Matt Ryan more so than Frank Reich or Marcus Brady?
Yeah, I certainly hear you, and I think it's a very valid question to be asked. I'd like to hear just kind of the context in relation with Pittman, and I could see him saying something like that. I also don't want to sound like I think Michael Pittman's a guy that just calls people out.
Right.
Like, I just think Pittman just kind of carries himself in that way. I do think it's a very relevant quote, and you appreciate his candor. It's like I appreciate Reich explaining why he, made the play call, because he was complaining, at that official. I think to summarize Pittman's comments, Eddie, it just gets back to what I said a few minutes ago. When you don't take shots vertically, it just limits you so much.
Yeah.
Tennessee kept everything in front of you. I mean, literally, I'm looking at right here, the longest play the Colts had all day yesterday
Was a 20-yard play to Pierce.
20-yarder to Pierce, nothing more than 14. Against the worst passing defense in the NFL.
Yeah.
That's so alarming. So alarming. When you're going to dink and dunk, fine. If you do it, you better be north of 70%, and you can't commit the turnovers. North of 70%, yeah, but committing fatal errors. Those 2 drives should have ended in, at the very least, 2 Colts field goals. So there's 6. Instead, they led to 10 Tennessee points. So that's a 16-point span, if not more, right there. And when you lose a game 19-10, that tells the full story of it. I also thought, last thing to note on Ryan, Eddie, I also feel like I'm starting to notice a little bit more of the lack of velocity.
Yes.
A few of those balls that are like, oh, it finally got to Campbell. Oh, it finally got to Pittman. It just noodle arm, a little harsh. I mean, he's still making throws where I'm like, okay, that's pretty good velocity, stepping into it. And I get it. And, it's not perfect around him. I do think the Colts still generally lack support around him. But those are some things to keep an eye on. And I do notice now every game now, he seems to be favoring something at some point during the game. Do these hits just start to add up? I had to start with Matt Ryan there. Just absolutely crippling turnovers.
Obviously, another slow start. That's another thing you didn't like, but I want to point something out here, or I want to ask you a question for you to play off of to go into this. Colts win the toss. They like to defer. You're on the road. You're in the AFC South. You know you're behind Tennessee in the standings. You know you struggle to come out with a fast start. Do you think maybe Frank Reich needs to, change up the approach a little bit? You know you have a good defense. Get that offense out there on the field to see if they can get it going early, and try to, kind of energize that sideline a little bit in the first quarter.
It's, again, a fair question to be asked. Scotty actually messaged me that before the show started. On my list of Reich issues, that is pretty low, to be honest with you.
Rightfully so.
And I say it again.
I said rightfully so. There's other things to worry about.
And we're about ready to get to one of those here, but just to finish that statement, I understand Reich's thinking yesterday. You've started with the ball 6 straight games start the year, and you haven't scored on any of those drives. So are you thinking, let's send out my best unit to start the game? If you're able to get a stop, does that send a message? And I fully understand coaches that love to get the ball out of the third quarter. And, the Colts had a golden opportunity yesterday, Eddie. They got the ball late half, then they got the ball to start the third quarter, and they didn't score in either of those chances. They got the stop yesterday to start the game.
Yeah.
Tennessee moved it a little bit, but they got the stop. They obviously couldn't turn it into any points. So, again, I understand where you're coming from with that. It's not as high up on the list as some others. Next on things I didn't like is just the continued slow starts. Again, your last halftime lead is Christmas in Arizona. You've been down double digits in 6 straight divisional games. We're going to play this clip from halftime. I'm going to butcher her name. I believe it's Aditi Kikabala. I think I really butchered that, so my apologies on that front. She does the halftime report coming back to start the third quarter. When I heard this yesterday, I burst out laughing. It was better than crying. And the end of this clip, when she very much expresses, and the Colts have Matt Ryan relaying a message that Frank Reich gave to her at halftime, that's obviously kind of like the humorous part of the clip, but I think it's more of it's a 15-second snippet of where the Titans and the Colts are as franchises right now and how their head coaches handle both of their football teams. So, Eddie, will you cue this up? Again, the CBS post-halftime report from their sideline reporter yesterday from Mike Vrabel and Frank Reich.
Mike Vrabel's team has the lead, but he was not a happy man. He told me that his team is giving Matt Ryan too much time and that they're fortunate to have gotten those big plays. Meanwhile, over on the other side, Frank Reich told his team, hey, this is what we've been doing all year. He said we get the ball, we score on this first drive, then we're only down in a one-possession game. And he said, we have Matt Ryan.
Well. You have Matt Ryan, which is a massive reason why you're down 13-0 at halftime. I would start there. And I know, again, that's kind of the humorous / mortifying part of that clip. But, Eddie, the Vrabel part and the Reich part, to me, sums up everything about where the Colts are and where the Titans are. You have Mike Vrabel, not happy, pissed, I believe was the word she used, fortunate enough to have gotten those big plays. Feels like he's not getting enough pressure on Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan just threw 2 massive interceptions in the first half. You have Frank Reich,
uber optimistic, get a score, and then we have Matt Ryan to get us back in a fourth quarter game for the insert number time this season because Matt Ryan's turnovers have put you in such a position that you need to have him get you out of his own mistakes. It just, to me, sums up the edge that I feel like Tennessee always has, the urgency the Titans have, and the complacency that the Colts have. I'll go back to what I said earlier. I asked Frank Reich on Friday, does this game mean more to you? Given the fact that you're hired in the same cycle, Reich and Vrabel, given the fact that your owner's been very public and behind closed doors ripping members of that organization for losing to the Titans, does the fact that you've lost 4 straight, does this mean more? And he said yes.
And does the fact that you got the job over Mike Vrabel factor into this a little bit too?
Right. I think all of that. I think naturally as a human being, like I agree with Reich, that would probably weigh on me. And yet you hear that halftime tone, and who's the one on edge?
Mike Vrabel.
Who's the one that's the division champ, defending division champ, the one that's won 4 straight, the coach that's up 13-0 at halftime? That's the one that sounds like he's desperate, sounds like he's fiending for something. And yet the Colts are sitting there just, we 9 straight games with a halftime deficit. We're good. Yeah, we're going to get a score to start the third quarter, and then we've got Matt Ryan. It's just, to me, and I'm sure there'll be some people out there that are like, you're overreacting to one little snippet. That, to me, was just a perfect third-party anecdote that summarizes, I think, a lot of what we've talked about over the years. Is Tennessee, as I said earlier, played the most guys in the NFL last year, trade away A.J. Brown, Taylor Lewan lost for the season, Harold Landry lost for the season, yet they are that desperate dog looking for that, that little piece of meat, saying, we've got to find that. And you watch the Mike Vrabel clip after the game, him and Ben Jones embracing their center who was banged up all game long, and you can kind of see just everything that the Titans just kind of go through to scratch and claw and get back in it and continuing to be the older brother or the dad of the Colts. Whereas on West 56th Street, in my opinion, it's way too much complacency. It's way too much the same message that is getting stagnant and getting old, and the results are leading you down this path of continued poor starts in the AFC South games, continued poor starts in general. You're playing behind the 8 ball, and when you continue to do that, and you only want to talk about your quarterback's fourth quarter comebacks and not his turnovers that are putting you in the situation for needing fourth quarter comebacks, you're not going to see changes. If I'm Jim Irsay, I'd be very jealous of what's going on in Nashville, of what they've created there. Because, again, I don't think their personnel is that great. I don't think it's division leading great. I don't think it was certainly, their current state with the injuries to Lewan and Landry and trading away A.J. Brown. And I just thought that clip, and in general, Eddie, the slow starts, the continued having to dig yourself out of a hole, that's a reflection of where you're at right now from a coaching standpoint.
Last little quick question from me before we get to the final thing that you didn't like. We've only heard Jim Irsay after wins still. We have yet to hear Jim Irsay after a loss.
Yeah, pretty quiet leaving the stadium, right?
Yeah. Is that a little concerning to you when you when you're trying to factor in accountability from the top down?
Yes. Yep. It is. It's very concerning. And I've mentioned that a few times this season, Eddie, and we're, I guess, approaching 24 hours post that game, and we still haven't heard. I believe he just fired off a tweet thanking the blue-clad shirts or something.
For traveling down I-65.
Right, all that. Yeah, it is. And behind closed doors, I do think there's a little bit more venom. I mentioned it on last Wednesday's pod and explained it, that I think Jim Irsay is very close to wanting to see Sam Ehlinger in the lineup. And it's a question I'll ask Frank Reich here in a few hours. We'll see what the answer will be. And I think we can get into some of that during Twitter questions, because I know a lot of people are asking about Ehlinger.
Yeah. Last thing that you did not like from the game, Matt Hawk.
Yes, Matt Hawk. Eddie issues there. Just awful punting. Horrific. I mean, the net average was what, like 31?
Yeah, I don't think he had a punt longer than 38 yards.
He did have the 160-yarder.
Oh, that's right.
He did have the 160, but yeah, the other 4 punts were all just horrific from a net standpoint. I thought your special teams in general was pretty poor. I know Chase McLaughlin made the 50-yarder right down the middle, but your kick return unit, I usually feel like it's a strength. You struggled there. That's usually a constant for you, and it wasn't there. Part of me is like, will Matt Hawk be kicking or punting for this team on Sunday?
I think he will.
I mean,
I wonder if he's like nicked up or banged up in some capacity.
that was alarming. So yeah, I wanted to throw that in there. I feel like he could be the next scapegoat. At the scapegoat dinner, it'll be Rodrigo, Danny Penter, Matt Hawk, and who else? Nick Cross. I'm trying to think who else has been benched. Brandon Faison not benched, by the way. 8 less snaps than Isaiah Rodgers.
And Rodgers got the start, too.
Rodgers did get the start, but pretty much the similar rotation to what we've seen outside of Rodgers.
One thing from me that you didn't include, I didn't like the utilization or lack of utilization of the tight ends. Mo Alley Cox, 24 snaps. That was the highest out of the 3 tight ends. Granson saw 21 and Jelani Wood saw 19.
No targets, right, for Mo Alley?
Correct.
1 target in his last 90-some snaps.
Outside of that Tennessee game, he hasn't had more than 2 targets in 4 of his last 5 games.
Wow. That is not good.
No. But I think the one thing that we both agree that we like, who needs to be an all-pro selection, and arguably the only all-pro selection from this Colts team, and a Pro Bowler, Grover Stewart.
Grover Stewart, outstanding, Eddie. 12 tackles for him. That is such an eye-popping number. Like, that is wild to me. 12 tackles for a defensive tackle. And again, he's more of a nose tackle than a defensive tackle. And I just think Grover Stewart should be commended for a guy that was a middle-round draft pick, signed a big second contract, and yet his play has ascended since he signed that big second contract. No contentment whatsoever. His play has gone to another level. I do think the change in defensive system and the defensive line approach probably is aiding some of that. So major tip of the cap to Grover Stewart. Again, 12 tackles, the most for a defensive tackle in a game this season. That's NFL-wise. You look at the Colts franchise. They go back to 94 and keeping those stats. It's the most for a defensive tackle in a game since then. So I just, the red zone defense, pretty good. Jonathan Taylor, I thought looked decent. I thought better than decent, actually, coming back from the ankle injury.
I thought he looked the best he had looked in all season almost.
I thought probably deserved a few more carries than the 10 he got. But outside of Grover, man, I just can't go anywhere else for things I liked. I mean, the red zone defense again. But yeah. Grover Stewart deserves a Pro Bowl. He will not get it because he doesn't have the notoriety or the sacks. So yeah.
I agree with you there, unfortunately, for Big Grove. All right, we have a lot of Twitter questions, so let's get into them. Flippin'. What does Matt Ryan have to do to actually get benched? Is it possible, or will he have to be, or will the Colts have to lose so many games before we're out of contention for that to happen?
Yeah, I think that is a huge, huge question, of course, right now, and one that I'm very curious about of like, does the AFC South standings, does that keep Matt Ryan there? The fact that you are not going to be that far out of it for a while, is it one more multi-turnover game and then you make the switch? Because once you make the switch, there's no real turning back, Well, once you go to Ellinger, there's no real turning back of that. Part of me thinks it's likely going to take multiple multi-turnover games, and then you're 3 back in the division for them to totally say no. Because, again, then you got to start thinking about Matt Ryan for next year and what that message means as well. And I'm speaking a lot of this from the Colts' point of view. In my opinion, I've probably seen enough. But if I'm thinking about it from where the Colts are coming from, unless Irsay would have to step in and totally make the call himself for, I think, it to happen in a quicker manner than what I just laid out.
This one comes from Rodney. We've already kind of briefly hit on this, but he said that Frank Reich said the pick 6 was on him. We've already explained what that was. But Rodney says that he's not buying that excuse that he's selling. If you can't do your administrative duties as a coach, someone else should be calling the plays or coaching. Also, why didn't the 37-year-old former MVP quarterback and Matt Ryan use a timeout then to reset into a good play call? Pissed, Kevin. I'm pissed off. Thanks for taking one for the team and analyzing this horse crap. Love the pun, Rodney.
Yeah, that was very good by Rodney. Yeah, it's an awful look on Reich. It's an awful look. Those are the things in NFL games where plays are so precious, or seasons are so precious, you just can't have those sorts of mistakes. And I don't think you're a good enough football team to overcome those sorts of mistakes. And it's something that if you are Frank Reich and you are going to be the play caller and the head coach, you've got to know in that situation, that should have been a face mask penalty. You've got to swallow whatever emotion is fuming inside of you. And as that play clock begins for the next play, you've got to call the play to Matt Ryan. And let's say you get done with the play call with 28 to go on the play clock. Then you go over to the line judge or the side judge, whoever, I guess it would have been, maybe the actual ref, the head official that probably should have thrown that flag, and you can rip them or you can yell about and I know this sounds like very like fourth grade parent, but like what good is that going to do? You yelling at the official in that moment.
Right.
It's not like, oh yeah, you're right, Frank. Yep, let me throw that flag. And I get it, like it's part of sports. You yell at the officials. But you can do that in a little bit more civil manner, a little bit more of a different time, and not impacting your play calling, and you're putting your quarterback, in Reich's opinion, in a bad position. Now, again, having said all that, I expect more out of Matt Ryan in that moment. You got him to recognize mistakes or bad plays and get you out of bad plays, or make bad plays not worse, and he made them worse. So, twofold with that one.
This is from Mamba. KB, can you please stop telling us that Frank Reich is a great offensive mind? Third game without a touchdown this season, and the offense is just embarrassing. I ask you guys again, are we sure there's no one else who can play call?
Yeah, Mamba, totally acceptable question, of course. While I think there is evidence in recent years that the Colts have been a pretty good offensive team, and I've gone over those numbers, and I don't need to rehash them. There's no defending this offense right now. There's no defending Frank Reich and how he's handled the situation. Do I think the personnel could be a little bit better in some key spots? Certainly, but still, it's awful. And again, it's not like you're playing good defenses.
No.
And that's, I think, just what adds to it. You've got to be near the bottom in points scored, if not at the bottom. And I'd be willing to bet if you look at the majority of teams around you, it's teams that have probably had to go to multiple quarterbacks this year. Steelers, maybe Dolphins. I'm trying to think of other teams that have just been lacking in the scoring department. I guess Bears haven't. Oh, have the Bears played somebody else besides Fields?
I'm pulling it up now. But no, they haven't.
I just think I think in general you lack some creativity. I know there were some plays, the design stuff to get Hines and Campbell a little bit more in space yesterday, but again, force some shots down the field. Pierce has got to be in the game plan on those outside the number plays week in and week out.
All right, here you go. Denver, they average 14 a game. Steelers 15 a game. Bears 15.5 a game. Indianapolis Colts 16, and the Los Angeles Rams average 17 a game. Those are your bottom 5 teams in the NFL in scoring.
Well, some of those teams do have pretty good quarterbacks. I mean, I guess Rams in that boat, and Packers. As far as play calling, I guess Marcus Brady, would be the other option, but he's never done it at NFL level. Like, you would still have questions there. I'd be stunned if Wright gave up play calling.
I think it would take a lot.
Again, I mean, it would take Irsay getting involved, which, boy, I don't know. Again, this is different for Irsay, and I'm sure we have some Irsay specific questions coming up on the pod, but again, he's not used to watching an offense look like this since he's been the sole owner. An offense that had expectations.
Yeah.
An offense not led by, Curtis Painter or Jacoby Brissett or any of those other years when you were really, really poor.
Now, I do want to point out Marcus Brady has called plays before, but not in the NFL.
CFL stuff?
Yeah, he did for 5 years in the CFL before he was an assistant quarterbacks coach with the Colts in 2018.
I remember asking this to Frank Reich. This would have been a couple years ago at the end of the preseason. Like sometimes you see in the final preseason game, the head coach who's a play caller lets like his OC call the plays.
Yeah.
And I asked him if he would do that with Sirianni, and he said no. And I kind of stood around and we chatted a little bit more about that afterwards. He's like, I just think it's a bad situation to put your offensive coordinator in, and like you're calling plays for, Chad Kelly behind a third string offensive line. And like part of me like, okay, I see where you're coming from on that. I do find it interesting that you have now seen Nick Sirianni, Matt Eberflus move on. Neither of them call the plays in their next stops. And even a guy like Brian Dable.
Sirianni doesn't?
No, I think it's Shane Steichen, I believe, the Eagles OC, who's the play caller there. And then Brian Dable with the Giants. Again, you guys have heard me say this. I just think on game days, everything is so critical. Time is precious. Time management is precious. Challenges are precious. Field position, when to go for it, when not to go for it, all of those things. When I've got a guy solely, as a play caller, you just get out of touch with some of that stuff.
You are correct. Sirianni did call him last year, but Shane Steichen is back to calling plays this year.
I think he's got some Chargers history with these guys, so
I'll have to check him out. Maybe that's a possible, interviewee.
There you go.
For some teams later down the road.
We'll see who those teams will be.
Niles says, the post-game comments from Frank Reich after these terrible losses seem to be losing the fan base. How long before they start to lose the locker room? They being Frank Reich.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think guys in the NFL are pretty self-motivated, and they should be, but that tired message and just creating a culture of on edge, not being complacent, those things, I do think you can get head coach on down. And at some point, Eddie, when do you look at 9 straight without a halftime lead, 6 double-digit deficits in a row to AFC South teams? That starts to become the norm. Again, losing the locker room, like I don't think guys are going to be like, screw this, I'm not playing hard. But just the natural urgency, I feel like, is lacking.
Yeah, I can feel that too. Felt it for a while now. But another question. This is from Zane. It's another one pertaining to Frank Reich. It seems that Frank Reich, all 3 phases, Frank Reich, he should say, continues to justify this terrible play from the offense in his play calling, with it being early in the season. He likes to say, quote, we saw a lot of good things or positive things out there. Maybe it's just me, but I just feel like that talk should be used for training camp, not week 7. The season will be over a lot faster than he and Matt Ryan thinks, in his opinion. My question is, at what week, if this trend continues, do you think it will be too late to figure it out and the, quote, positives will just be smoke and mirrors and we miss the playoffs? Sorry for the long question, but wanted to get this out there. Longtime listener from Minnesota.
Thank you, Zay. Appreciate that.
Wait, MN is Minnesota, right? It's not Montana?
Yeah.
Okay.
Minnesota. MT for Montana, I believe is my guess there. Colts at Vikings this year, right? Mid-December?
Do they?
Saturday or Sunday game, I think. They haven't decided that one yet. Yeah, that's the extra game, I'm pretty sure, this year.
Yeah, you're right.
7 teams make the playoffs. And the AFC South, again, I don't see Tennessee winning 11 or something like that. So I think you're always going to be mathematically in it for long, long stretches. I am just curious, like, how is Irsay going to view the product?
Or how does he view the product?
Right. Does he view it? Because, again, this is different. I would argue there hasn't been a season like this so far that has had high-end preseason expectations, and especially with the offense, you have not met that. So I'm very interested to see how Irsay reacts to that. As far as we saw a lot of good things, positive things. That talk should be for training camp, not week 7. I couldn't agree more with that. I thought Reich offensively afterwards was like, move the ball great, like this and that. We just got to finish off drives better. Would they have one drive go in the red zone?
Probably.
I'm pulling it up right now. Yeah, one drive into the red zone. Again, against a defense that I don't think anyone all of a sudden is, thinking of the 85 Bears. And I do think, and this is Ballard related, this is Irsay related, of a 17-game season, they tend to side more on the balance of it's a long season. We'll eventually figure it out. Mm-hmm. That's a dangerous game to play. It's a dangerous game to play when 5 of your 6 divisional games are in the first 7 weeks of the season. I also think it's a dangerous game to play when you continue to be behind the 8 ball and now you've been swept by the Titans. And again, I've heard Ballard use some of that and Reich. And again, now it's trends, Eddie. We're 7 weeks into the season. The midway point of the year is approaching. And right now, as we sit there on October 24th, the Colts have proven to be a slow-starting, boring, can't-score offensive football team with a turnover machine at quarterback. Woo! That's how I'd sum up the offense. Defensively, I'd say sound in many areas, missing the critical turnover.
Yep.
Special teams, a little bit hit or miss.
They're dealing with a lot of injuries right now on special teams.
Yeah, Doman has been in
Stewart
and out.
got hurt.
Yeah, Stewart. Yeah, if
Doolin.
that's a torn pec, he's probably out for the year. Yeah, Doolin on IR. That's how I'd sum them up. Slow start, boring, can't score at an acceptable offensive level. And yesterday, the entire offense was healthy, right?
Yes. Yes.
So that's how I look at it. Defense, pretty sound. Pretty good in a lot of areas, missing the turnover, being put in some bad situations. Yeah.
Sam Ellinger questions are starting to resurface again. This one comes from Mitch. At what point, why not rule out Sam Ellinger? The playoffs are now unlikely, so why not find out what the kid has? If he's bad, the Colts can finish with a high draft pick, and if he has a spark, they have a future. If he's somewhere in between, are the Colts really any worse off?
Mitch, like I said a little bit earlier, we touched on Sam Ellinger a lot last week. You guys heard me say that I think a lot of his elevation on the depth chart was owner influenced. I stand by that, and that's why I'm curious to see moving forward what will happen there. I just think at some point, Eddie, and I get it, quarterback is really unique, but if a player is protecting the football is one of the three most important things for a quarterback.
Yeah.
If you have a player playing that position and he's doing his job at the worst level of anybody else in the NFL from a turnover standpoint, when does that player face a little bit more of the music? And is this starting to get Adam Vinatieri like 2019? I don't think it's at that level yet, but the turnovers are just such an issue. Such an issue. Like if you took a little wand and said turnovers cured or average in turnovers, you'd be looking at a much better football team right now.
Yeah.
So you're talking out both sides of your mouth with how they're treating Ryan as of now. And I get it. Once you make a move at quarterback, you probably don't go back. So it does have a little bit more ramifications than it would be just replacing a kicker or replacing Matt Hawk, something like that. But those are very relevant things. Mitch says the playoffs are now unlikely. I think if you are going to ask anybody, go up on the street and be like, hey, you think the Colts will make the playoffs? That they would probably say no. But again,
there's still, a 20% chance?
Internally, they're not going to act like that. And you understand that. Teams do come back from deficits. You understand it from a solely we're thinking short-term method. It's when does long-term thinking insert their decision-making? That, I think, is really curious.
About 8 questions left, so we've hit the halfway point with Twitter questions. Tyler is up next. We've already kind of discussed this, but what's up with Mo Alley Cox not being targeted the last 2 games at all and just once in Denver? Seems like he'd be awesome. We'd want to get him more involved. And I want to go with the statistics here, Kevin, more accurately, he has seen a total of 15 targets this season, and if you remove that one game against Tennessee, his stat line for the year, 5 catches on 9 targets for 51 yards, 0 touchdowns. And that's in 4 games.
Man. 1 target in the last 3, and I think a snap count is just a little bit under 90 snaps in those games, so that would be alarming. I thought in general yesterday the tight ends are really quiet. Mo had 1, Jelani Woods had 2 targets, 1 catch for 4, and Kylan Granson had 1 target, 1 catch for 6. That's a really quiet day based off what the tight ends did to them in week 2.
They had 11 catches for like 181 yards and 2 touchdowns, right?
Yeah, huge. They were perfect, right? Didn't they have like the 11 targets for 11 catches in that first matchup there? So, I had questions just, again, could you be boring at tight end? And I think there's been flashes certainly from the tight end group, but could you be boring there? I don't know. I don't feel like they have been consistent. Like, to me, again, safety blanket wise, I would love to think if they go, can you have a safety blanket at tight end? I just don't feel like that's there for them right now.
Why does the Colts fan base keep accepting these utterly inexcusable performances? This is from Jay. 9 games in a row losing at halftime. We are 1 Chris Jones personal foul call from having a losing record and are completely out of the AFC South title race. When is enough with Chris Ballard and Frank Reich? Love the pod, Kev.
Well, I appreciate that. Who was that from again?
Jay.
Yeah, I think, I tried to set the bar entering the year of the hot seat warmer analogy. I felt like it should have been on at that first level for Frank and Chris. Obviously, I feel like it's going to go up a little bit. I think what Jim Irsay's got to sit down and ask himself, Eddie, is this. Who do you want making one of the most important decisions in franchise history? And that is what you do at quarterback here in the next offseason plus, whenever you make that quarterback move. That's the question. It's one of the most important, most difficult decisions. Manning and Luck, when you got the number 1 overall pick.
Makes it easy.
You could do one of those zoo animals like they did to announce the draft picks. See if that orangutan can come back and do it for C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young or whoever. I guess maybe there's more debate there. Maybe it's just Stroud.
Ben Matherin?
Benedict Matherin, maybe he could do it. Maybe he deserves it. Can he play quarterback? Can he punt? That's the question. Who do you want making one of the most difficult and important decisions your franchise has ever faced? That's the question you got to have. And does Frank or does Jim Irsay look at it and say, I think Chris Ballard's a good talent evaluator. I think if he took a chance at quarterback, I think he'd find success there. Does he say Frank Reich's an offensive-minded head coach? He's worked with quarterbacks and Phillip Rivers and Andrew Luck and Carson Wentz or whoever. They found success with him at an acceptable level. I want to see if he can tap into that with a young quarterback with identified traits. Or does he say, nope, they had their chance. They kicked the can down the road for far too long, and we have a stale message in the locker room. That's what Irsay's got to decide.
Ben brings up a pretty interesting point. I think that we've kind of discussed a couple times this year, especially early on in the season with pass protection. But Ben says, is it just me or is Jonathan Taylor a pathetically bad pass blocker?
Boy, Eddie, those stunts showed up again yesterday. Like, the passing off of stunts was a big issue again yesterday. There's definitely been issues there with Taylor. And again, I think it's a lot of pre-snap identification stuff.
Or communication.
Right, yeah, identification or communication, whatever you want to call it. I can't imagine he did much of that at Wisconsin. Frankly, they didn't throw it much. It's not like they were in a lot of obvious situations.
Yeah.
I think Hines whiffed on one yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, too. I feel like he did. Ben, that's something that's probably worth pointing out.
Daniel has zero optimism left for the season, and he wants to know, does this team run this back next year with Matt Ryan at quarterback? I see him as an end-of-the-year cut, and if things aren't humming early against the Washington Commanders, I'd expect a short lease. Expect a short hook to Sam Ehlinger, but we know Frank Reich is too loyal to do so. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that cap hit for next year, right? $35 million.
Pretty big.
That's large. Yeah, I've said it before. I think Irsay stepping in would have to. If I'm Jim Irsay, I'm kind of sitting down in my office on this Monday morning. You're making a list of things that would be bothering me as owner right now. The future at quarterback and the general approach to roster building would be one.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of go hand in hand. I'd be worried that my offense is boring as hell.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes on the heels of me tweeting out back in January about what you need to succeed in today's NFL. You need a quarterback and an offense that can score 30 in regulation, et cetera, et cetera. And, Eddie, in a way, I feel this about IU football right now. Like, IU football was awful when I was in college. But they were quarterbacked by Kellen Lewis and Ben Chappell for most of the time I was in college. The offenses were not the issue very often. They could score. They could put up points. And I do think there's an element of, you have passionate fans, and maybe our listening audience is not necessarily the fan base that I'm talking to with this comment, Eddie, but you do have fans that, like, their level of venom would be different if this team was scoring 27 a game and losing. If they were losing shootouts.
Like Detroit.
Yeah.
Early.
And then there are some that say, Kevin, screw that. Results are results. I don't care if you're scoring 7 a game or 70 a game. Just show me what the result is at the end of the game, and that's what I care about my product. So, again, I know I'm not speaking to everybody here, but when you look in the stands, and we had a caller today on our morning show, Mo from Ohio, drives in 3 hours for every game.
Wow.
Mo mentioned that. He mentioned the entertainment product. He mentioned, like, I'm not used to this. And I've gotten this before. Eddie, you or I in our ages, and you're much younger than I am, but even me at the age of 33, my age group's not used to this. Your age group is certainly not used to this from an offensive product. So I guess that would be also on the bothersome list if I were Irsay. And then lastly, what would be on the list is the state of where we're at in the AFC South. And it's how I opened up today's pod. Like, Jim Irsay undressed his coaching staff and scouting department last year after they got swept on Halloween by the Titans. He went very public on Twitter before the first matchup this year.
Yeah.
Now you've been swept. Now you're just another team in a bad division. You've won one of your last 6 AFC South games. You haven't won a division since 2014. Those are the 3 things of, like, bothersome worry that I would be sitting there and kind of just fiending over of, like, oh, gosh, where do we go? I thought there was a really interesting quote today, Eddie, in the Peter King Monday Morning Quarterback column.
What was it?
This was related to Jim Irsay and Daniel Snyder's comments, which, for those that missed it, I touched on it last week on the Wednesday pod. I appreciate some of you that have reached out about those comments. But this was in relation to that. But Irsay said to Peter King, a quote, this is more about organizations and business and, being leaders in those situations. But Irsay said, and I quote, 2 things destroy great institutions: being emotional and rationalization. Rationalization, that's saying, oh, it's not that bad. We can deal with this. People are always going to love the game. They'll always turn on the TV to watch Mahomes on Sunday. Obviously, Irsay saying that quote in relation to the NFL and the state of the league and those things. But clearly, he holds those 2 words of emotional and rationalization close to his, business, leadership, ownership heart. So I think they're relevant to applying it to the Colts in emotion and rationalization. Emotion, I think we all understand. You don't make decisions in emotion. You kind of sit back, you bring in third parties, et cetera, et cetera. But the rationalization part is very interesting to me. And in specific, when Irsay then quotes himself, he kind of talks in third person when he says, oh,
it's not that bad. We can deal with this.
That's not the Jim Irsay that I grew up reading or listening to.
Right. And Irsay's not saying he's accepting that. He's saying you've got to ask yourself that. Yeah. Oh, it's not that bad. We can deal with this. Like, if that's your thought process, you better be damn sure that there's some reason, proper reasons for that rationalization. I thought that was a really, philosophical comment from Irsay. And again, I think it can be applied to the Colts organization. And this is a guy that took over ownership when his dad died in 96 or 97. So he took over, and this is different. This is unique for him. I think this is such a unique situation for so many Colts fans and for him as the owner.
I'm going to skip around here. I'm going to go to Dylan and Jake's question last because they're more toward the future kind of outlook, and Clayton and Frankie are more pertaining to kind of like the game.
Appreciated that.
Clayton says, when does Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay force Frank Reich into a Phillip Rivers type, quote, retirement to save face instead of firing them? It's the only out I see unless Jim Irsay gets rid of the whole regime, front office included. He's got to be heated at this abysmal offensive performance in all of 2022.
Well, Clayton, I would add this. Should Ballard get say in that? Should they be tied at the hip?
Yes, my opinion.
I would agree.
I think there's.
I don't know if the owner holds that same sentiment, though.
I think there should be more heat towards Ballard than Frank, but that's just my opinion.
If we were presenting a debate project, and you know what, Eddie Garrison, we might have that on a future pod. I would think you would have some evidence for that. And I think something to remember again, and I've said this about the Ryan, and honestly, Ryan Grigson and I have had these conversations. As much as coaching, I think, should have been a little bit more in the limelight and the lack of player development in the Pagano era, the GM hires the coaches. The GM has say, if you really want to make a change, you are above. If you look at chain of command, Irsay, Ballard, Reich. That's how it goes. So any Reich decision has sign-off from Ballard.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, that's something that I think you have to remember about that. As far as firing a coach or GM, well, let's also remember that, it's not like salary cap driven. It's going to come down to, financially, does Jim Irsay want to eat the money or not? I think, not to bring up IU football again, but Eddie, I can see Tom Allen keeping his job because I don't think there's boosters that care enough about IU football to want to pay the buyout.
That's true.
There's boosters that care enough about IU basketball that wanted to pay Archie Miller's buyout.
Yeah.
With the Colts, you don't have that apathy. The owner, financially, he'll be the one to make the call or not.
This comes from Frankie. Any chance that we see Zaire Franklin get some recognition for his play in the top 100 players as voted on by the players? Would be surprised if he gets much attention for the Pro Bowl or other season awards because he isn't a household name. Dude is a tackling machine.
Yeah, Frankie. Zaire Franklin's having a really nice year. He's got no chance at the top 100 list. I don't want to. I guess there's no really easy way to say that without it sounding like a slight at Zaire Franklin, but there's a lot of players in the NFL, and, there's reasons why the Colts have, 3 on the list every year or 4. I mean, yeah. Again, really nice year for Zaire Franklin. Good dude, great leader, but top 100 player in the league?
I wouldn't go that far just yet.
No.
This comes from Dylan. With the likelihood of the Washington Commanders draft pick being a third-round pick now, do you think there is some discussion about delaying drafting a future franchise quarterback another season?
I'm shivering reading that question. I just shivered so hard I took this pen with the cap off, and I think I got blue pen now on my chin. I'm shivering over here at that thought.
Good thing you have a beard to cover it up over there.
Yeah, and it's getting thick right now. I gotta get the old trimmer on it. Like I said to start off the pod, Eddie, I want to get in some trade deadline stuff on Wednesday. I think this question has a little bit more relevance. Again, Carson Wentz is on injured reserve, so that means he'll miss at least 4 games.
Yeah.
The Washington bye week is not till December. Taylor Heineke just won a football game. If Taylor Heineke continues to win some football games, I don't see them going back to Carson Wentz. And if Taylor Heineke starts to lose some football games and the Eagles continue to win, then the question will become, do you go to Sam Howell and skip over Carson? So
Do you want Washington to defeat the Colts? You want the Colts to defeat Washington? So it's
right. It's so weird. Yeah, it's awkward. But to Dylan's point, like, you know, you are in this weird situation of, like, you're drafting the teens, and if you look at Houston and Carolina and Seattle and, you know, I guess Detroit, like, you know, aren't they 4 quarterback teams? Does that all of a sudden put you in the 5th quarterback spot? Or, you know, Philly's got a high pick. Are you praying that you're up there with Philly? Yeah. You know, someone messaged me a little bit earlier, and it's kind of popping in my head right now, like, would you go to Ellinger after the bye week? Yeah, it's 4 games to go in the year. Minnesota, Chargers, Giants, Texans.
be the most ideal time.
Right.
But it also depends where you're at in the season.
Exactly.
And I mean the standing specifically.
You know, month and a half away, but certainly there's recent history around the league that you see teams do that. The bye week provides an opportunity with that, but I guess it is an interesting thought that I hadn't really thought about.
Last question. This pertains a little bit towards the draft. Who is your favorite college quarterback? #scouting season from Jake.
Well, it'll be Drew Pine if he can beat Syracuse and Clemson these next 2 weeks.
How about that?
Jake. Look, I'd be lying to you if I studied this super in depth right now. I'm so locked into Notre Dame on Saturdays that A, I don't watch a ton of other college football. B, I'm trying to maintain my relationship as a married man and a father of 2 on Saturdays, knowing that Sundays take a lot of time away from that. So, again, I've seen some of the SEC quarterbacks. Hendon Hooker and Will Levis has some traits that I'm attracted to. I think C.J. Stroud's very good. I also am not naive to think that C.J. Stroud's necessarily going to be there. And I'm excited to chat with Dane Brugler. I think he's a great NFL draft guy. We'll certainly get him on the pod here coming up in the offseason. But I want to see more of the SEC kind of second tier isn't right, but the non-Bryce Young SEC quarterbacks, I want to see them in some of these bigger games. Hooker at Georgia. Will Levis against some of these bigger games coming up. Anthony Richardson in some of these games as well.
The interesting thing for me with Hooker is that he's 25 already.
Very old. A
guy that I've kind of been monitoring this year, Will Rogers.
Comes from a system that people are skeptical of.
Will Rogers.
Mississippi State kid?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I mean, he did not play well the last 2 games against Alabama. He was 30 of 60, 231, but didn't turn it over, didn't throw any touchdowns. And against Kentucky, he was 25, 37, 203 yards, touchdown and a pick. So, I mean, he wasn't great, but he wasn't awful. He had a 4,000-yard passing year last year as a sophomore. He's a junior this year. He's got over 2,500 yards passing, 23 touchdowns, 4 picks.
Yeah, he is another name to throw on the list. It does seem like there are some more QBs kind of in that second tier that are pushing towards, I don't know, middle half, top half to round 1. I know we're really early on that. And we still got, a full month plus of the season to go. So all very relevant.
That was the last Twitter question. You got anything else to add here?
I just want to say this in closing again. This season is starting to trend in a direction of like you have a section of the fan base that is nervous that if the Colts end up 8-8, that everything will get swept under the rug. And that was another quote. And obviously comparing the Colts situation to the Daniel Snyder situation is probably a bit unfair by me. But that was another Irsay quote that he said in the Peter King piece of like, I don't want to see this get swept under the rug. And I do think that is a quote that can apply to his football team. And again, I apologize for comparing the two, but it comes out of the owner's mouth. So I find a little bit of, I find it fine in mentioning it, but this cannot get swept under the rug. I felt like 2015 Colts season got swept under the rug, and then 2016 you fired Grigson, 2017 you fired Chuck, and all of a sudden the problem you found there in 2015 became a 3-year problem and a 3-year long process to recover from. And you kept Pagano for that 2017 season. Like, that can't happen. So when you identify it, you make the move.
Tennessee won a road playoff game and fired Mike Mularkey and hiring Mike Vrabel that next year. A road playoff game at Arrowhead.
Mm-hmm.
Don't see that very often. Team wins a road playoff game and they fire their head coach. They realized they were stuck. They realized they need to do something different. And boom. They've been the most consistent AFC South team since then. So
kind of want to ask you this, just kind of a little bit of a teaser for Wednesday, but you said Wednesday's pod a little bit more focused on trade deadline scenarios. Yeah. What kind of stuff you want to get into?
Well, it's a week from Tuesday. Past history would say the Colts will be very quiet at the trade deadline, and I think it's key to look into where you're at right now, how things should be viewed. Does the Carson Wentz draft pick situation impact your decision-making there? Do you have anybody on the roster you can move? Is there a big name you could move? I am always the believer in I will listen to anybody call me about any player on my football team. Because at the very least, I just want intel.
Yeah.
You know, even if I am no way, shape, or form trading Grover Stewart, to throw out a name, I want to know who you consider expendable on your roster. Because now I'm jotting that down in my notebook of, okay, all right, Eagles say this guy is available. Then I know when free agency hits or when future trade talks happen, like, okay, I've got a little bit of intel. So trade deadline's usually pretty quiet in the NFL. Obviously, we saw a big one late last week in Christian McCaffrey. It's typically pretty quiet, but I do want to hit on that. Buyer, seller, where should the Colts be? Again, a week from Tuesday, the NFL trade deadline. Eddie Garrison, good to have you back.
Thanks. Nice to be back.
Colts and Commanders, 425. Tarek Glenn into the Ring of Honor. No word yet on Jim Irsay and Daniel Snyder in the Octagon at halftime of the game. We'll keep you posted on that leading into Week 8 here of the NFL. Everybody, thanks for tuning in to Kevin's Corner. We'll talk to you in a few days.